We've been chasing the sun for millions and millions of days now, and looking for things that don't like to be found.
The artist is Led Zeppelin, and the name of the album is Led Zeppelin 4. Well, it was the first album I ever owned. My dad kind of agreed to allow me to buy an album that I wanted, which was Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication. After having an album that he wanted me to have for several weeks before, that was kind of the deal. He's like, I'm going to get you an album and you can have it for a few weeks and then you can get an album you want. So Dad bought me this, and yeah, I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I think. When did Californication come out? Because that'd say exactly how old I was, but that had just come out and that was a big deal. There's no way to get around any track on this. It's just a phenomenal album start to finish. Every song is, in my mind, a complete masterpiece. And like, you can pick any song off the album and it could be like the biggest moment of their set if they played anymore. But like, say, when I saw Robert Plant a few years ago at Glastonbury, you know, he did Rock and Roll. That was the end of his set, and Rock and Roll is not necessarily a big song off this album, but it just goes to show that every song on this album is just huge. Yeah, you have to put it on from start to finish, because like, maybe if you just pick a couple of songs, like if you just picked you know, Black Dog, you'd get the sort of heavy rock classic side of Led Zeppelin. But the Battle of Evermore, Going to California, even Stairway to Heaven to a degree, like all of these songs make up the just absolute next level quality of where they could go with stuff. So yeah, you got to listen to it from top to bottom. I was making dinner, we had a bunch of friends over. It was 3 weeks ago. Yeah, 3 weeks ago, just after I bought it, because I've just recently acquired the access of a record player, so I've started buying records, and it's one of the first ones that I needed. The artist is Coldplay, and the album is A Rush of Blood to the Head. I couldn't go past it. Coldplay have just been massive for me, and they have a pretty interesting range of material, especially some of the more recent materials are a little bit cringeworthy, but nothing. They're the soundtrack to my life. That guy has got me wrapped around his little finger. No matter how bad their music gets, I can't get past the enormity of the love I have for these early albums. And in amongst a lot of the crap that they've released in the last 5 or 6 years, there's still heaps of gems, and he's one of the most important songwriters, especially like of my life, but I think of our kind of contemporary music climate. There's so many big songs on here, but for example, like, I have learned a lot of these songs myself over time. I've learned Politic, God Put a Smile Upon Your Face, The Scientist, Clocks, Green Eyes, Warning Sign, and A Rush of Blood to the Head. But the ones I play the most are probably Green Eyes, Warning Sign, and A Rush of Blood to the Head, which are the later songs. So they're maybe the ones I have connected with most. So I can't get away from the big songs, but it seems even more difficult for me to get away from the you know, later tracks in the album. So as a whole, I think the last time I can actually remember was probably the last time I cleaned my room. I like listening to Coldplay when I'm cleaning my room for some reason. There's something kind of cleansing. It's music that I've listened to for so much of my life. I think it reconnects me with me a bit. Something about cleaning my room is this sort of therapeutic, like, meditative thing. So that would have been in mid-January. That gets funnier the longer you guys wait to air this. The artist is Neil Young, and the name of the album is Comes a Time. Well, I chose this album because of the amount of influence Neil Young has on me, I guess. It's not my favourite Neil Young album, but it was in the rack. Also, I have been looking for Neil Young records in the last sort of 6 or 7 weeks. At that record fair, there was a copy of After the Gold Rush and a copy of Comes a Time, and After the Gold Rush was like $50. and my $300 cash was already dwindling at that point after Led Zeppelin, the Beatles and Pink Floyd, after those sections had chewed me up and spat me out. And so I went with Comes a Time, which I've always really, really liked, but it's not my favourite. But yeah, so I've been listening to this one a lot lately, so it seemed like kind of a good choice. Like, I've learned a couple of these. I've learnt Human Highway, I've learnt Lot of Love, and I've learnt Comes a Time. So those three massively, but out of all the Neil Young albums, like, there's other Neil Young albums where, like, there's this very specific songs that have just really, really powerful moments, but this album's more, I put it on for the feel of the whole album, the sound. It's very acoustic, this one. It's like, it's kind of smack bang in the middle of his sort of folk sound. It's not too country, it's not too rock, it's not too pop, it's not even too classic. It's not like there's heaps of really big, important Neil Young songs on here, but there's a feeling you put it on and there's like these beautiful jangly 12 strings, and just it's a timbre to the album that leads me back to it. I was making breakfast, because this is another one I bought at that fair. I was making breakfast listening to this last week. No, the week before. Yes. The artist is Wolfmother, and it's self-titled, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, it's their self-titled first album. Well, it's another one that I just couldn't go past. I was, what was I, maybe 15 when this came out. This was like the first big concert I went to, was when they kind of, it had blown up by the point I saw it. I saw them at the Horden, and they had like Johnny Knoxville and Bear Majira like wasted walking out onto stage, and they were just at the height of their buzz and excitement. And it was genuinely life-changing. Like, they were the soundtrack to a very important period of my sort of 15 to 18 stage, which is obviously a huge time of change and of discovering who you are, and they were an album that was one of the soundtracks to that time for me, so I couldn't really go past it. Definitely as a whole, like, it's just so strong. From like the last track, Vagabond, is like one of the only kind of acoustic bass, and like, interesting that I have Led Zeppelin 4 and Wolfmother, because in some ways I see a lot of likenesses between the two albums. They're kind of a really solid psychedelic rock band that both albums are at points in the band where they just have this freedom and fluidity to kind of move in different directions, and it's magic. And like, the last song is Vagabond, and that's quite acoustic. Some might even call it a little bit bluesy. And like, everything from the beginning to Vagabond is huge. Like, Dimension was an incredible song. There's nothing on there. There's literally nothing on there that's passing or throwaway. I genuinely can't actually think of the last time I listened to this album. It's probably, like, how do I say this? Like, I wouldn't even put Wolfmother on at a party anymore. So if I was listening to this album, I'd be listening to it on my own. And it was a great album for parties. So I don't know when, probably like at least 5 years ago. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the album's aged poorly, but I think the band has probably aged poorly. Yeah. I haven't heard a Wolfmother thing that I've really gravitated to in quite a while, and that's just me saying that as a fan. I've got no critique of the band or the people in it other than that, but as a fan I haven't really warmed to anything from Wolfmother in a long time, but it doesn't take away from how important this album is for me. It's quite political, isn't it? I'm navigating this quite well.